Notification came through at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I know the exact time because I'd been staring at the clock on the wall above the nurse's station, the kind of cheap institutional clock with the second hand that stutters rather than sweeps, and I'd been counting those stutters the way you do when you have nothing left to do but wait. My daughter was in the bed behind the curtain. She was 63 pounds, and she hadn't kept food down in 4 days, and the doctor had used the word dehydration so many times it had stopped sounding like a word. My phone was face down on the chair beside me. I turned it over when we checked in because I didn't want to be that person, the one scrolling while his kid was hooked to an IV. But when it buzzed 3 times in a row, I picked it up. It was a banking alert. Withdrawal. Joint checking. $11,400. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time because the number didn't make sense. We didn't have $11,400 in checking. Except apparently we had, until about 20 minutes ago. I switched to the bank app and just stood there in the glow of it, looking at the balance. $47 and some change. I sat back down. My daughter shifted in the bed and made a small sound, the kind children make when they're not quite asleep and not quite awake, and I put my hand on the rail near her feet and didn't move for a long time. My wife and I had been married for 11 years. I want to be fair about this, or try to be, because I've had enough time now that I can at least attempt it. She wasn't a villain when I married her. She was funny and stubborn, and she made the best green chillo stew I've ever had in my life. And she cried at hardware store commercials, the ones with the fathers teaching their kids to fix things. She wanted a family. She said that clearly, early on. She wanted a house with a porch and a dog, and a daughter, in that order. We got all 3. What changed, I couldn't tell you with any certainty. These things never have a clean starting point. There's no date you can circle on a calendar. It was more like a slow leak, the kind you don't notice until you're already standing in water. She started working later. Then she started working weekends. Then she started putting her phone face down on the counter, and I noticed but didn't say anything because I was 61 years old and tired, and I told myself I was being paranoid. Men my age get paranoid. We've seen enough to expect the worst, and sometimes we manufacture it when it isn't there, except this time it was there. I found out the way most people find out. Not through some dramatic confrontation, not through a private investigator or a confession, but through a stupid accident, a message notification that appeared on her laptop screen while she left it open on the kitchen table. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a pen, but I saw the name, and I saw enough of the preview text, and something in my chest went very quiet in a way that I can only describe as the opposite of a heartbeat. His name was Dennis. He was 54. He drove a truck and lived outside of Flagstaff and apparently had been the reason my wife started putting her phone face down. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't say anything for 3 more weeks. I know that sounds strange, but I was trying to figure out what I actually wanted, and that took time. And also our daughter had started complaining about her stomach, and then the stomach complaints became something more serious. And suddenly the thing I was working up the courage to address became secondary to keeping a small person hydrated and alive. The morning before we went to the ER, my wife told me she had a conference in Scottsdale. She said it casually, over coffee, the way she said most things by then, with a kind of practiced lightness, like she'd rehearsed the tone. 2 nights, maybe 3. She wasn't sure. She texted me when she landed. I said okay. I said okay because our daughter was sitting at the kitchen table, picking at her toast, and I didn't want to do whatever the alternative was in front of her. My daughter was 9. She loved dinosaurs and hated math, and she'd recently decided that she wanted to be a marine biologist, even though we lived in New Mexico, and I was not going to let her watch her father unravel over breakfast. My wife kissed our daughter on the head. She did not kiss me. She picked up her bag and her keys and she walked out the door, and I listened to the sound of her car backing down the driveway and I thought, Scottsdale. By noon, my daughter couldn't hold down water. I called the pediatrician. The pediatrician said to go to the ER. I carried my daughter to the car in a blanket because she said she was cold and it was 74 degrees outside. She weighed nothing. I thought about how when she was a baby she used to fall asleep on my chest and her whole body wasn't much bigger than my 2 hands spread flat. She still trusted me to carry her. That was the thing that stayed with me the whole drive. At the hospital, they got her into a room and started fluids and said it was a stomach virus, probably viral gastroenteritis, probably going around, probably nothing serious, but they wanted to keep her overnight for observation. I sat in the chair beside her bed and I texted my wife. She didn't answer for 40 minutes. Then she said, "Oh, keeping her in her thoughts, let her know I love her." No punctuation, no phone call. I put my phone down and looked at my daughter, and she looked at me and she said, "Is Mom coming?" I said I wasn't sure yet. I said Mom was traveling and might be hard to reach. She nodded like she was 60 years old. Then she said, "That's okay, you're here." I had to look away so she wouldn't see my face. At 11:47, I saw the withdrawal notification. I sat with it for probably 15 minutes before I opened the full banking app. Then I opened our savings. That account had been emptied 3 days prior, a transfer I hadn't seen because I don't get notifications on savings. Just checking. $31,000 moved to an account I didn't recognize. I did the math in the dark. 2 accounts, combined over $40,000. Gone. I didn't call her. I thought about it. My thumb hovered over her name for probably 30 seconds. Then I put the phone in my pocket, and I went and sat beside my daughter, and I watched the IV drip, and I counted the stutters of the clock, and I thought about what a man my age does with information like that. The answer, I decided, was nothing. Not tonight. Tonight the only job I had was to sit in that chair. I called my brother-in-law the next morning. Not her brother, mine. His name is Pete. He's 2 years younger than me. He's a retired electrician, and he has a way of being completely calm in situations that would make most people spiral. I'd known him for 40 years, and I'd never seen him raise his voice. I told him what I knew. The withdrawals, the notifications, Dennis from Flagstaff, the Scottsdale conference that almost certainly wasn't a conference. Pete was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You need to call an attorney before you call her." I hadn't thought of it in that order. He said the money's already gone. Calling her doesn't bring it back. Calling an attorney might. He gave me the name of a woman he'd used when he and his ex-wife split up 12 years ago. He said she was sharp, and she didn't waste time on feelings, which is what I needed. I called the attorney's office at 8 a.m. Her name was Patricia Holt. Her assistant said she'd had a cancellation and could see me at 10. I drove to her office still wearing the same clothes I'd had on in the ER. I hadn't slept. I must have looked like something a dog had dragged in because the assistant brought me coffee without me asking, and Patricia Holt, when she came out to greet me, looked at me the way doctors look at patients, assessing, measuring, already thinking. She sat across from me and asked me to tell her everything from the beginning. So I did. When I finished, she asked me a few questions. Dates, amounts, how long the accounts had been joined, whose name was on the mortgage. Then she leaned back and said, "The transfers were marital funds. The timing. Right before she left, that matters. We can work with that. She told me not to contact my wife directly. She told me not to contact Dennis. She said to take photographs of everything, statements, notifications, any paperwork, and email them to her office by end of day. She said she'd file for a temporary restraining order on the remaining assets and reach out to opposing counsel." I asked her what remaining assets meant, given that the accounts were empty. She said the house. I hadn't thought about the house. I drove back to the hospital and sat with my daughter while she ate Jell-O and watched cartoons, and I thought about the house. We bought it 8 years ago. I'd put in the original down payment for money my father left me. It sat in my name first, then we'd refinanced, and both names went on the deed. Patricia called at 2 in the afternoon. She had spoken to my wife's attorney. Apparently my wife already had one, which told me more than anything else about how long this had been in the planning. The attorney said my wife would be in touch directly. Patricia said to tell her to call the attorney's office instead. My phone rang at 2:34. It was my wife. I answered. I know I wasn't supposed to, but it had been 11 years and I wanted to hear what she would say. She said, "I'm sorry you found out this way." I said I was sorry too. She said she hadn't been happy for a long time. She said she should have left sooner. She said she hoped I understood that this wasn't about our daughter, that she loved our daughter and would be fighting for her share of custody. I said, "My attorney will be in touch." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I took what I was owed." I said, "We'll let the court decide what you were owed." I hung up. My hands were completely steady. I don't know why. I would have expected them to shake, but they didn't. I sat in the parking lot of a Walgreens for about 10 minutes just listening to the sound of traffic, and then I drove back to the hospital. My daughter came home on Thursday. She walked in the front door and immediately demanded macaroni and cheese and a movie, and I made the macaroni and cheese. And we watched a movie about a sea turtle, and she fell asleep on the couch with her feet in my lap. I didn't move for 2 hours. I just sat there in the dark with her feet on my legs and the television on mute, thinking about what the next few months were going to look like. My wife's mother called that evening. I almost didn't pick up. I'd always gotten along reasonably well with her. She was a small, direct woman from Montana, practical to a fault, not given to excessive emotion. I figured she was calling to yell at me or defend her daughter, and I wasn't sure I had the energy for either. Instead, she said, "I want you to know that I didn't know about any of this until 2 days ago." She told me she was leaving after the fact. I said I appreciated her saying so. She said, "She's my daughter and I love her, but what she did to that child, not being there, not even calling the hospital. I won't defend that. I want you to know that." We talked for about 20 minutes. She said she would like to stay in her granddaughter's life, if I was willing. I said, of course, whatever had happened between me and her daughter, that wasn't something my daughter needed to lose. When I hung up, I felt something shift. Not relief exactly. More like the shape of things becoming clearer. Who was actually in this with me and who wasn't? The legal process took 7 months. I won't walk through every step because honestly, some of it I'd rather forget. But here's what matters. Patricia Holt was very good at her job. The transfers my wife made in the weeks before she left were characterized as dissipation of marital assets. She moved money knowing she was leaving, and she did it without my knowledge or consent. The judge was not impressed. The recovery wasn't complete. It never is. Some of it had already been spent, but between the asset freeze Patricia filed immediately, the documentation I've been careful to preserve, and the fact that my wife's attorney apparently didn't anticipate how quickly things would move, we recovered a little over $28,000 of the $42,000 that had been taken. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to not lose the house. I stayed in the house. The court awarded me primary physical custody of our daughter, with my wife getting alternating weekends and a week each summer. My wife moved to Flagstaff. I try not to think too much about the geography of that. The first time my daughter came back from a weekend with her mother, she was quiet in the car. We were almost home when she said, "Dad, are you sad?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. Then I said, "Sometimes, but not right now." She seemed to accept that. She looked out the window for a while, and then she said, "I think I want a dog." I said we could probably do that. We got a dog 2 weeks later. He's a large, ridiculous golden retriever named Admiral, who has absolutely no business being that happy all the time, and he sleeps at the foot of my daughter's bed every night. And sometimes when I walk past her room and see the two of them, her curled in a ball, him stretched out like he owns the whole mattress, I think that some things actually do land where they're supposed to. My daughter is 10 now. She's fine. Better than fine, honestly. Kids are more resilient than we think. Or maybe they're resilient in ways we can't measure yet, ways that only show up later. She asks about her mother sometimes. I answer as honestly as I can without saying anything I'll regret putting in her head. What I'll tell you, at 63 years old, is that I wasted about 6 months being angry in the wrong direction. I was angry at Dennis. I was angry at the attorneys and the court dates and the paperwork. I was angry at myself for not seeing it coming. None of that anger did anything useful. The only thing that actually helped was getting up every morning and making breakfast and getting my daughter to school and coming home and doing the dishes. The ordinary things. The small obligations. Those were the things that held me together when I couldn't think of anything larger to hold on to. The house still has her things in it. Or it did. I've been clearing it out slowly, the way you do when you're not sure what you're ready for. There's a coffee mug on the shelf above the stove that I haven't moved yet. I see it every morning. Some days it doesn't bother me at all. Some days I look at it for a second longer than I mean to. I'll get there. My brother Pete calls every Sunday. My daughter's grandmother came to visit last month and stayed for a week and made my daughter a quilt with a pattern of sea turtles on it, which I thought was the kindest thing because she didn't have to do that. She didn't have to stay connected to a family she wasn't legally bound to anymore. But she did. There are people like that. Quiet, steady people who just stay. I've been paying more attention to that kind of person lately. The ones who showed up without being asked. The neighbor who brought food the week my daughter was in the hospital. Pete who gave me the name of an attorney instead of a glass of bourbon and commiseration. The doctor who came in at 3 in the morning to check on a little girl she'd only met 4 hours before. You spend a lot of your life, I think, looking at the wrong things. The damage. The losses. The clock on the wall with its stuttering second hand. But then something happens and you start looking at what's actually there. What held? What didn't leave? That's where I am now, standing in a kitchen in New Mexico, 63 years old, making macaroni and cheese for the second time this week because my daughter requested it again, and a golden retriever is sitting on my foot, which he is not supposed to do. And the window above the sink is open, and there's a breeze coming through that smells like dust and rain, the way it does here in the summer. And for just that moment, with the water boiling and the dog on my foot and my daughter in the next room arguing with a homework problem out loud, I am not sad at all. I am just here. And it turns out that's enough. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any mystical sense, just the plain mechanical truth of it. Every choice a person makes sets something else in motion. My wife made her choices over a long stretch of time, quietly, behind a phone turned face down on the counter. She didn't make one bad decision. She made dozens of them, stacked on top of each other, and each one required the next to cover it. That's how these things work. They don't collapse all at once. They collapse when the weight finally exceeds what the structure can hold. The night I sat in that hospital chair reading a banking notification in the dark, I didn't feel righteous. I didn't feel like the universe was correcting itself. I felt like a 61-year-old man who had been very tired for a very long time and had just gotten a lot more tired. But what I did in the hours that followed, calling Pete instead of calling her, walking into Patricia's office instead of driving to Flagstaff and making a scene, those choices mattered. Not because I was smart. Because I was, for once, still enough to think before I moved. That's the thing nobody tells you about hard moments. The instinct is to react, to call, to confront, to demand an explanation. And sometimes that instinct costs you everything, your leverage, your clarity, your dignity. I've watched men my age do it. I've almost done it myself. The ones who come out the other side with anything intact are usually the ones who waited one more minute before they spoke. I don't think my wife is a monster. I think she made choices that required her to stop thinking about consequences, and she got very good at that over time. The $42,000 she moved, she had convinced herself she was owed it. People who are about to do something they know is wrong are very skilled at constructing reasons why they're actually the wronged party. It's a kind of protection. It doesn't hold up in court, but it holds up long enough to get them out the door. What Patricia did and what the law did wasn't punishment. It was just accounting. You take marital assets without disclosure while planning to leave, and the court looks at that and calls it what it is. That's not fate. That's just a system that, imperfectly and slowly, tries to make the math add up. My daughter is 10 now, and she's fine. She has a dog named Admiral, and a grandmother who made her a quilt with sea turtles on it, and a father who makes macaroni and cheese twice a week without complaint. She didn't choose any of what happened to her. That's the part that required the most from me. Holding the weight of something she didn't cause and shouldn't have to carry. I think that's what it means to actually be a parent. Not the good days. The days when you're exhausted and frightened and someone small is still counting on you to be steady, and you choose to be steady anyway. Not because it's easy, but because it's the only option that doesn't make things worse. Staying. Showing up. Making the ordinary things happen when nothing feels ordinary. I used to think that was the minimum. I've come to believe it's actually most of it.